The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store in Tombstone, Arizona territory, kicking up a cloud of dust that made Grace Reynolds shield the faces of her twin daughters against her worn traveling dress. It was September 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden boardwalks and false-fronted buildings lining Allen Street. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped down from the coach, her legs trembling after 3 weeks of bone-jarring travel from Philadelphia. In one arm she held 18-month-old Emma, and clutching her skirt was Emma's twin sister, Lily, both girls wide-eyed and cranky from the long journey. The driver hauled down her single battered trunk and tipped his hat without a word, leaving Grace standing alone on the dusty street with her babies and her last $20 to her name. She scanned the wooden sidewalk for any sign of the man she had come all this way to meet. Mr. Howard Jenkins had seemed kind enough in his letters, a merchant who needed a wife to help run his store and keep his house. He had made no mention of children in his advertisement, but Grace had been honest in her reply. She had told him about the twins, about being widowed when her husband Thomas died of pneumonia, just months after the girls were born, about having nowhere else to turn when her landlord evicted her from their cramped Philadelphia tenement. Mr. Jenkins had written back saying he understood and would be waiting for her at the stagecoach station with open arms. But the street was nearly empty in the afternoon heat, save for a few horses tied to hitching posts and a dog sleeping in the shade. Grace's stomach twisted with dread. She adjusted Emma on her hip and took Lily's small hand, walking toward the general store whose sign read, "Jenkins Mercantile." Inside, a woman with graying hair looked up from behind the counter, her expression hardening the moment she saw Grace and the children. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mr. Howard Jenkins," Grace said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm Grace Reynolds. He should be expecting me." The woman's face went pale, then flushed red. "Howard Jenkins died 4 days ago. Heart gave out while he was loading flour sacks." She crossed her arms. "Who are you to him?" The world tilted beneath Grace's feet. "I was to be his wife. We had an arrangement." The woman's eyes flickered with something between pity and annoyance. "I'm his sister, Martha. Howard never mentioned any mail-order bride to me, and even if he had, the arrangement died with him. I'll be closing the store and heading back to Tucson next week." She looked pointedly at the door. "I'm sorry for your trouble, but I can't help you." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. Emma started to whimper, sensing her mother's distress. "Please, we've come so far, I have nowhere to go." "That's not my problem," Martha said, her tone final. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Sullivan might have a room." Grace's pride kept her spine straight as she picked up Lily, balancing both girls as she backed toward the door. "Thank you for your time." Her voice barely shook, though inside she was screaming. The boarding house had no vacancies, neither did the hotel. By the time the sun began its descent toward the Dragoon Mountains, Grace was sitting on a bench outside the stage depot, the twins asleep against her shoulders, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She had enough money for perhaps a week's worth of food if she was careful, but nowhere to sleep and no prospects in a town where she knew no one. The sound of boots on the wooden planks made her look up through blurred vision. A tall man stood a few feet away, hat in his hands, concern etched on a weather-worn face that might have been 30 years old or 40. It was hard to tell with cowboys who spent their lives under the desert sun. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water. "Pardon me, madam," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble that somehow didn't wake the sleeping children. "I don't mean to intrude, but I saw you asking around earlier. My name is Peter Patterson. I run a cattle ranch about an hour's ride from here." I overheard you talking to Martha Jenkins, and I wanted to offer my condolences. Howard was a good man." Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassment flooding through her. "Thank you. I didn't know him, but I'm sure he was." Peter shifted his weight, turning his hat in his calloused hands. "I also couldn't help but overhear that you have nowhere to stay. I know this is going to sound improper, and I understand if you say no, but I have a large house on my property. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, lives there with her husband who works as my foreman. They have their own quarters, and there are 2 spare bedrooms on the 2nd floor. You and your daughters would be safe there, and you'd have time to figure out what you want to do next." Grace stared at him, trying to read his intentions. She had learned to be wary of men who offered help with nothing in return. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Peter met her gaze steadily. "My wife died in childbirth 3 years ago along with our son. I know what it's like to have the bottom drop out of your world. I'm not asking anything from you, madam, just offering a safe place to rest until you get your bearings." Something in his eyes, a deep sadness that mirrored her own grief, made Grace believe him. She was out of options and out of pride. "I can work for my keep. I can cook and clean and help with whatever needs doing." "We can talk about that later," Peter said. "Right now, these little ones need proper beds and you need a hot meal. My wagon's just down the street. I came into town for supplies." Grace nodded, too exhausted to argue. She woke the twins gently, and Peter carried her trunk as if it weighed nothing, loading it into a sturdy wagon already half filled with sacks of grain and other provisions. He helped Grace and the girls onto the bench seat with a gentleness that surprised her, then climbed up and took the reins. As they rolled out of Tombstone, Emma and Lily perked up, pointing at the strange landscape of saguaro cacti and rocky outcroppings painted gold by the setting sun. Peter pointed out a hawk circling overhead and a jackrabbit bounding through the scrub, coaxing shy smiles from both girls. "How old are they?" he asked. 18 months. Emma is the one with the birthmark on her left hand, and Lily has a cowlick that makes her hair stick up in the back no matter what I do." Grace felt herself relaxing slightly as she talked about her daughters. "They're good babies, usually. The travel has been hard on them." "I imagine it's been hard on you too," Peter said. "It's a long way from Philadelphia. You could tell from my accent, that and the way you're dressed. We don't see many ladies in traveling suits like that out here." He said it without judgment, just observation. Grace looked down at her threadbare gray dress, which had once been respectable but was now stained with dust and baby drool. "Everything I own is in that trunk. It's not much." "It's enough," Peter said. "Out here, people care more about what you can do than what you have." The ranch appeared as the last light was fading from the sky, a sprawling property with a 2-story house painted white, several barns and outbuildings, and endless stretches of fenced pasture where cattle grazed. Lamplight glowed warmly from the windows, and as Peter brought the wagon to a stop, the front door opened. A small Chinese woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She appeared to be in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a kind smile. "Mr. Peter, you are late. I was worried." "Sorry, Mrs. Chen. I brought some guests." Peter helped Grace down from the wagon, then carefully lifted each twin girl. "This is Mrs. Grace Reynolds and her daughters, Emma and Lily. They'll be staying with us for a while. Grace, this is Mrs. Chen and her husband, Samuel." He nodded toward a lean man with graying temples who had emerged from the barn. Mrs. Chen took in the situation with a single glance and immediately switched into a mode of brisk efficiency. "Come, come. Girls must be hungry. I have stew on the stove. Samuel, help Mr. Peter with the trunk. Mrs. Grace, follow me." The interior of the house was surprisingly refined for a ranch home, with polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and curtains at the windows. Mrs. Chen led Grace upstairs to a spacious bedroom with a large bed, a dresser, and a washstand. Next to it was a smaller room with 2 small beds already made up with clean linens. "The girls can sleep here," Mrs. Chen said. "Bathroom is down the hall. We have running water. Mr. Peter's father put in a tank and pump system. Very modern. You wash up, I will bring food." Grace felt tears prick her eyes again at the simple kindness. Thank you so much." Mrs. Chen patted her arm. "You are safe here. Mr. Peter is good man, lost too much but good heart. Now wash those sweet babies and come down to eat." The stew was the best thing Grace had tasted in months, rich with beef and vegetables, served with fresh bread that Mrs. Chen had baked that morning. The twins devoured their portions, and color returned to their cheeks. Peter ate quietly, asking gentle questions about their journey and listening attentively to Grace's answers. After dinner, Grace insisted on helping with the dishes despite Mrs. Chen's protests. Peter excused himself to check on the livestock, and Grace found herself standing at the kitchen window, watching his tall figure cross the yard to the barn, lamplight in hand. "He is lonely," Mrs. Chen said quietly, handing Grace a plate to dry. 3 years he grieves. Works from dawn until he drops into bed, never goes to town except for supplies, never looks at women. This is first time he brings someone home. He's just being kind," Grace said. Mrs. Chen made a small sound that might have been agreement or disagreement. "Maybe. But also, maybe he sees someone who understands his pain. His wife, Rebecca, she was everything to him. When she died, part of him died too. He built those small beds himself 2 years ago. I asked him why. He said he could not explain, just felt he should." Grace looked at the older woman sharply. "You're not suggesting this was fate. I am saying nothing, just telling you what I see." Mrs. Chen smiled. "Now those babies are falling asleep in their stew bowls. Put them to bed and you sleep too. Tomorrow is new day." Grace carried the twins upstairs, one at a time, and tucked them into the small beds that had been waiting for no reason Peter could name. She changed into her nightgown and crawled into her own bed, expecting to lie awake worrying about the future. Instead, she fell into the deepest sleep she had known since leaving Philadelphia. She woke to morning light streaming through white curtains and the sound of roosters crowing. Emma and Lily were still asleep, their small faces peaceful. Grace dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Mrs. Chen already preparing breakfast. "Good morning," Grace said. "Please let me help. I meant what I said about earning my keep." Mrs. Chen studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You can make the biscuits. Flour is in that bin, lard in the pantry. Mr. Peter likes them with honey." They worked together in comfortable silence, and Grace found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the kitchen work. When Peter came in from the barn, his face and hands freshly washed, his eyes widened at the sight of the table laden with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and fried potatoes. "Mrs. Grace is good cook," Mrs. Chen announced. "Those biscuits are hers." Peter took one and bit into it, his expression softening. "These are wonderful. My mother used to make them like this." "My grandmother taught me," Grace said. "She was from Tennessee originally." The twins toddled down the stairs and Grace moved to get them, but Peter was already there, scooping them both up with easy strength. "Good morning, little ladies. Are you hungry?" Emma patted his face with her small hand, and Lily giggled. Grace watched, her heart doing something strange in her chest. Thomas had loved the girls, but he had always been awkward with them, nervous about their fragility. Peter held them as if he had been doing it all his life. After breakfast, Peter showed Grace around the property while Mrs. Chen watched the twins. The ranch was impressive, with over 200 head of cattle, a vegetable garden, chicken coops, and a small orchard of fruit trees that Samuel Chen tended with careful devotion. My father started this place in 1867, Peter explained as they walked. He came west after the war, brought my mother and me when I was just 10 years old. They both passed away within a year of each other, right before I married Rebecca. I inherited everything. He paused by a white fence, looking out over the grazing cattle. I always imagined filling that big house with children. Seemed like Rebecca and I had all the time in the world. I'm sorry, Grace said softly. Losing someone you planned your whole life with, it leaves a hole that never quite fills in. No, Peter agreed. It doesn't. You just learn to walk around it. He looked at her directly. How long were you married? 4 years. Thomas was a clerk in a shipping office. We were happy, but we struggled. He worked long hours in a cold building, and when winter came, he got sick. By the time the doctor said it was pneumonia, it was too late. Grace wrapped her arms around herself. I tried to keep our rooms, but without his income, I couldn't make the rent. My family disowned me when I married Thomas because they thought I was marrying beneath me. I had no one to turn to. That's when you answered Howard's advertisement. I answered 20 advertisements, Grace admitted. Howard was the only one who wrote back after I told him about the twins. Most men want a wife, but not someone else's children. Peter was quiet for a moment. Their loss. Those girls are a blessing. They walked back to the house, and Grace spent the rest of the day helping Mrs. Chen with the endless tasks that kept a ranch house running. She washed clothes, ironed linens, prepared vegetables for dinner, and looked after the twins. It felt good to be useful, to have purpose again. Days turned into a week, and then 2. Grace fell into the rhythm of ranch life, rising early to help with breakfast, spending her mornings cleaning or baking or mending, her afternoons watching the twins play in the shaded yard while she did handwork. Peter was gone most days, riding out with Samuel to check the herds or repair fences, but he always came back for dinner, and he always made time to play with Emma and Lily. Grace tried not to notice how her heart lifted when she heard his boots on the porch, or how his rare smiles made something warm bloom in her chest. She was a widow with 2 children and no prospects, and he was a successful rancher who had offered her charity out of the goodness of his heart. She had no right to develop feelings for him, but feelings didn't ask for permission. One evening in early October, after the twins were in bed, Grace sat on the front porch with her mending basket, enjoying the cool night air. Peter came out and settled into the chair beside her, a cup of coffee in his hands. "Grace, I want to talk to you about something," he said. Her heart sank. This was it. He was going to tell her it was time to move on, that she had imposed long enough. "Of course. You've been here almost a month now, and you've become part of this place. Mrs. Chen says she doesn't know how she managed without you, and Samuel says the meals have never been better." Peter set down his coffee cup and turned to face her. "Those girls have brought life back into this house. I hear them laughing, and I remember why my father built this place. It was meant for family." "Peter," Grace started, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish. I know this is going to sound crazy, and I'll understand if you say no, but I want to ask you to marry me." Grace's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. "What? Not for the reasons you're thinking," Peter said quickly. "I'm not declaring undying love or anything like that. We barely know each other. But I like you, Grace. I respect you. I think you're brave and strong and kind. I think you're a wonderful mother, and I think we could build something good here together. The girls would have a home and a future, you would have security, and I would have a family again." "That's not enough reason to get married," Grace whispered, "isn't it?" Peter's eyes were earnest in the lamplight. "People marry for love and end up miserable. People marry for convenience and find happiness. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to be my partner, to help me run this ranch and raise those beautiful girls and maybe, if we're lucky, find some contentment in the process." Grace's mind raced. It was practical, certainly. It was safe, but it was also selling both of them short. What if one of us does fall in love? Not with each other, but with someone else. Then we deal with it honestly, Peter said. But I can tell you right now, I'm not looking for that. I had my great love. I don't expect to find that again, and I'm not sure I want to. It hurt too much to lose it. I understand that, Grace said slowly. But Peter, you're a good man. You deserve more than a marriage of convenience. So do you, he countered. But sometimes we take what life offers us and make it into something worthwhile. He stood up, giving her space. Think about it. There's no rush. You can stay here as long as you need to, whether you marry me or not. I just wanted you to know the offer is there. He went inside, leaving Grace alone with her thoughts and the vast Arizona night sky. She sat there for a long time, weighing her options. She could try to make it on her own, find work in Tombstone, perhaps as a cook or a seamstress. But jobs for women were scarce, and jobs for women with small children were nearly non-existent. She could try to contact her family, beg them to take her back, but the thought of that humiliation, of raising her daughters in that cold house where love was measured by social standing, made her stomach turn. Or she could marry Peter Patterson, a kind man who offered her respect and partnership if not passion. She could give her daughters a real home, a future. She could build a life here in this strange, beautiful desert where the sunsets painted the sky in colors she had never imagined existed. The question was not whether it was practical. The question was whether she could live with never having what she had once had with Thomas, that deep, abiding love that had made poverty bearable and hardship meaningful. But then, she thought of how Peter's eyes crinkled when Emma made him laugh. She thought of how he always saved the best piece of meat for Lily, because he had noticed she was the smaller twin and needed extra nutrition. She thought of how he had never once made her feel like a burden or a charity case, how he asked her opinions on ranch matters and actually listened to her answers. Maybe it wasn't the passionate love she had known, but maybe it could be something just as valuable. Maybe it could grow into something neither of them expected. 3 days later, Grace found Peter in the barn, brushing down his horse after a long ride. Her heart pounded as she approached him. "Peter, I've thought about your proposal." He stilled, his hand on the horse's flank, but didn't turn around. "And? Yes, I'll marry you." Now he turned, his face carefully neutral. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Grace said. "You're right that we could build something good here. I want that for my daughters. And I want to be honest with you, I've come to care for you these past weeks. I don't know if it's love, but it's something real. Something I'd like to see where it goes." Peter's face softened into a smile, a real one that reached his eyes. "I care for you too. More than I expected to, if I'm being honest." He took a step closer. "We'll do this right. I'll get you a proper ring and we'll be married by the preacher in Tombstone. I want Emma and Lily there. I want to adopt them legally, give them my name if you'll allow it." Tears sprang to Grace's eyes. "You would do that? They're going to be my daughters in every way that matters," Peter said firmly. "They deserve to have that recognized legally. And Grace, I promise you, I will do everything in my power to be a good husband to you and a good father to them." "I know you will," Grace whispered. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church on the edge of Tombstone, with Mrs. and Mr. Chen as witnesses and the twins in their best dresses, which Grace had sewn from fabric Peter had brought from town. Grace wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Peter wore his Sunday suit and a new tie. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Peter kissed Grace gently on the cheek, a promise of respect and patience. Emma clapped her hands, and Lily shouted, "Papa!" which made everyone laugh because she had started calling Peter that days before, much to his obvious delight. They had a small celebration back at the ranch, with a cake Mrs. Chen had made and cider from the cellar. Samuel played a fiddle Grace hadn't known he possessed, and Peter danced with Grace in the parlor while the twins twirled around their legs. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house was quiet, Grace stood in her room, which was now their room, wondering what came next. Peter knocked softly before entering, giving her the choice to refuse him entry even now. "Come in," she said. He entered, still dressed but with his collar loosened. "Grace, I want you to know I don't expect anything tonight or any night until you're ready. We'll take this as slow as you need." Relief and something else, something like disappointment, flooded through Grace. "Thank you for understanding." "I do understand," Peter said. "Trust has to be built, so does comfort with another person," he smiled. "For now, if you're willing, I'd like to just sleep beside you. I've gotten used to an empty bed, but I think I'm ready to get unused to it." Grace nodded and climbed under the covers on one side of the large bed. Peter extinguished the lamp and settled on the other side, carefully keeping space between them. They lay in the darkness, listening to each other breathe. "Peter," Grace whispered. "Yes. Thank you for giving us a home." "Thank you for filling it," he replied. The weeks that followed were an exercise in learning each other. Grace discovered that Peter sang to himself when he thought no one could hear, old cowboy ballads in a surprisingly good baritone. Peter learned that Grace talked to herself when she was concentrating on a task, working through problems out loud. Grace found out that Peter had a sweet tooth and would do just about anything for her apple pie. Peter discovered that Grace was afraid of thunderstorms, a legacy of a childhood trauma she didn't want to discuss. They grew comfortable with each other in increments. A hand on the small of her back as he passed her in the kitchen, her fingers brushing his as she handed him his coffee in the morning. Sitting close together on the porch in the evenings, their shoulders touching. Small kisses goodnight that lingered a little longer each time. The twins adored Peter unreservedly, and Grace watched with a full heart as he taught them to identify birds, to pet the gentle horses, to plant seeds in the garden. He was patient with their toddler tantrums and delighted by their small triumphs. When Emma took her first steps without holding on to anything, crossing the parlor to reach Peter, Grace saw tears in his eyes. "I wish Rebecca could have known them," he said that night as they lay in bed. "She would have loved them." "Tell me about her," Grace said gently. She had been afraid to ask, afraid of the ghost that might stand between them, but she realized that honoring his past was important. Peter was quiet for a moment. "She was full of light. That's the best way I can describe her. She laughed easily and saw the good in everyone. She grew those roses by the front gate, spent hours tending them. When she got pregnant, she was so happy. We both were, but the baby was turned wrong and she labored for 2 days. His voice cracked. "I held my son for 5 minutes before he stopped breathing, and Rebecca was gone an hour later. I buried them together under the cottonwood tree on the east pasture." Grace rolled toward him and took his hand. "I'm so sorry." "I thought I would never want to try again," Peter admitted. "The idea of loving someone and risking that kind of loss, it terrified me. But then you arrived with those girls, and suddenly the house didn't feel like a mausoleum anymore. You gave me a reason to think about the future instead of just surviving the present." "You did the same for me," Grace said. "After Thomas died, I was just going through the motions, trying to keep the girls fed and clothed. I couldn't see past the next day. But here, I can imagine next year, 5 years from now. I can imagine the girls growing up, going to school, having real lives." Peter squeezed her hand. "They will. We'll make sure of it." In November, Peter took Grace and the twins to Tombstone for supplies and to handle the legal adoption papers. The town was busier than Grace remembered from her first arrival, with miners and cowboys crowding the saloons and the streets full of wagons. At the courthouse, a serious-looking judge reviewed the papers Peter had drawn up. "Mrs. Patterson, you're certain you want to give up sole custody of your daughters to allow Mr. Patterson to adopt them?" "I'm certain," Grace said firmly. "He's their father in every way that matters." The judge signed the papers, and just like that, Emma and Lily became Emma Patterson and Lily Patterson, with all the rights and protections that came with having Peter as their legal father. "They're my daughters now," Peter said wonderingly as they left the courthouse. "Legally and officially." "They were your daughters the moment you decided to love them," Grace said. Peter stopped right there on the street and kissed her, a real kiss, full of warmth and promise and something that might have been the beginning of love. When they pulled apart, Grace was breathless. "I'm falling in love with you," Peter said. "I thought I should tell you." Grace's heart soared. "I'm falling in love with you too. I have been for weeks." They stood there grinning at each other like fools until Emma demanded attention and Lily started trying to climb out of the wagon. They finished their errands in a daze of happiness, and on the ride home, Peter drove one-handed so he could hold Grace's hand. That night, after the twins were asleep, their marriage became a real marriage in all ways, a joining that was both tender and passionate, an affirmation of the bond that had been growing between them. Afterward, Grace lay in Peter's arms, feeling complete in a way she hadn't felt since Thomas died. "I didn't think I could have this again," she whispered. "Neither did I," Peter said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "But here we are." "Here we are," Grace echoed and fell asleep smiling. Winter came to the Arizona territory, not with snow but with cold nights and shorter days. Grace threw herself into preparing the house for Christmas, determined to give the girls a holiday to remember. She made dolls from scraps of fabric, baked cookies in shapes of stars and trees, and convinced Peter to cut down a small pine from the mountains and bring it into the parlor. Peter carved wooden animals for the twins and bought Grace a beautiful shawl in Tombstone, soft wool in deep green. Grace knitted him a thick sweater and made his favorite pies. On Christmas morning, they exchanged gifts by the fire while the twins played with their new toys, and the smell of roasting turkey filled the house. "This is the best Christmas I've had in years," Peter said, watching Emma and Lily playing with the wooden horses he had carved. "Me too," Grace agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Everything I hoped for and more." Mrs. Chen and Samuel joined them for Christmas dinner, and the house rang with laughter and conversation. Grace looked around the table at these people who had become her family and felt blessed beyond measure. In January, Grace began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Peter, nervous about how he would react given what had happened with Rebecca. She found him in the barn one evening and he looked up from the saddle he was mending with a smile that still made her heart flutter. "Hello, beautiful. What brings you out here?" "I need to tell you something," Grace said. His smile faded, replaced by concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." "At least I hope you won't think so." Grace took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant, Peter, about 2 months along, I think." Peter went very still. Grace held her breath, waiting. Then he stood slowly, crossed to her, and pulled her into his arms. She felt him trembling. "Peter," she said uncertainly. "I'm terrified," he admitted, "but I'm also happier than I have any right to be." He pulled back to look at her face. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." "Then we'll go to Tombstone tomorrow and have you checked by Doc Harrison," Peter said. "And Grace, I want you to know whatever happens, we'll face it together. I won't lose you, I can't." "You won't," Grace promised, praying she could keep that promise. Doc Harrison confirmed the pregnancy and pronounced Grace healthy and strong. "Due in August, I'd say," he told them. "You take it easy, get plenty of rest, and you should be just fine. You've already had 2 babies, your body knows what to do." "What about what happened with Rebecca?" Peter asked bluntly. "Could that happen again?" Doc Harrison looked at him with sympathy. "Rebecca's baby was breech and too large. It was a tragic combination of circumstances. There's no reason to think the same thing will happen to Grace. But I'll be honest with you, Mr. Patterson. Childbirth always carries risks. All we can do is be prepared and trust in the Lord." Peter nodded tightly, and Grace squeezed his hand. Over the following months, Peter was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He didn't want Grace lifting anything heavy or working too hard. He brought her breakfast in bed and insisted she rest every afternoon. Grace appreciated his concern but also had to remind him that she was pregnant, not invalid. "I carried twins while working as a seamstress in a freezing apartment," she reminded him one day when he tried to take the laundry basket from her. "I think I can manage to hang up some sheets." "I just want you safe," Peter said. Grace set down the basket and took his face in her hands. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but we can't live in fear for the next 5 months. We have to trust that God will take care of us." "I don't want to lose you," Peter whispered. "You won't," Grace said firmly. "I'm strong and our baby is strong. We're going to be fine." As her belly grew, so did the twins' excitement about becoming big sisters. Grace tried to explain that the new baby would be very small and wouldn't be able to play with them right away, but Emma and Lily were convinced their new sibling would be the best playmate ever. Peter built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Mrs. Chen and Grace sewed tiny gowns and blankets. Samuel built a rocking chair for the nursery. The whole household prepared for the coming addition with joy and anticipation. In June, a telegram arrived that cast a shadow over their happiness. Grace's mother had died, and her father requested that Grace come home for the funeral. Grace stared at the telegram, feeling a complicated mix of grief and anger. "They didn't want me when I needed them," she said to Peter. "Now he expects me to come running. What do you want to do?" Peter asked. Grace thought about it for a long moment. "I want to write him a letter. I want to tell him that I forgive them, but that my home is here now, that he has grandchildren he's never met and another one on the way. That if he wants to be part of our lives, he's welcome to come here, but I won't go back to Philadelphia. That part of my life is over." "Then that's what you'll do," Peter said. Grace wrote the letter, pouring out years of hurt and ultimately choosing forgiveness over bitterness. She didn't expect a response, and none came. But she felt lighter for having sent it, as if she had finally closed a door that had been left ajar for too long. July brought intense heat, and Grace felt like she was carrying the baby in an oven. She spent most of her time in the shaded parts of the house, fanning herself and trying to keep the twins entertained. Peter brought her ice from the ice house and made sure she drank plenty of water. One particularly hot afternoon, Grace felt the first twinge of labor pain. She was sitting on the porch with Mrs. Chen, snapping beans when it happened. She gasped and put her hand on her belly. Mrs. Chen looked at her sharply. "Time? I think so," Grace said, "but the baby's not due for another 3 weeks. Babies come when they want to come, Mrs. Chen said practically. "Samuel, go get Mr. Peter and fetch Doc Harrison. Baby is coming." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Peter arrived at the house looking pale and frightened, and Grace had to reassure him even through her contractions that she was fine. Doc Harrison arrived and examined her, pronouncing everything normal. "First babies from a father can come early sometimes," he said. "Nothing to worry about. Let's get you upstairs, Mrs. Patterson." Peter wanted to stay with her, but Doc Harrison shooed him out. "This is women's work, son." Go boil some water and try not to wear a hole in the floor with your pacing. Labor progressed slowly through the afternoon and into the evening. Grace tried to be brave, but it hurt more than she remembered with the twins, possibly because she wasn't numbed by grief and exhaustion this time. Mrs. Chen held her hand and encouraged her, and Doc Harrison monitored everything with calm efficiency. Finally, just after midnight, Grace gave one last tremendous push and heard the beautiful sound of a baby's cry. "It's a boy," Doc Harrison announced. "A healthy baby boy." Grace burst into tears of relief and joy. "A boy. Peter has a son." They cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Grace's arms. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same creek water color as his father's. Grace counted his fingers and toes, marveling at the tiny perfection of him. "Can Peter come up now?" she asked. Mrs. Chen went to get him, and moments later Peter burst into the room. He stopped short when he saw Grace holding the baby, his face transforming with wonder. "Come meet your son," Grace said softly. Peter crossed to the bed on shaky legs and looked down at the baby, his eyes filled with tears. "A son," he breathed. "We have a son." "We do," Grace confirmed. "What should we name him?" Peter thought for a moment. "My father's name was Paul." "Would you mind if we called him that? Paul Patterson," Grace said, trying it out. "It's perfect." Peter carefully took the baby from her, holding him with the same gentle competence he showed with the twins. "Hello, Paul, I'm your papa. I'm going to love you and protect you for all of my life." Grace watched her husband with their son and felt her heart might burst from happiness. This was everything she had thought she'd lost when Thomas died. A family. A home. Love. Doc Harrison checked Grace over one more time and pronounced her in excellent health. "You did wonderfully, Mrs. Patterson. Get some rest now. This little fellow will have you up plenty in the nights to come." After the doctor left, Peter settled into the rocking chair with Paul, refusing to put him down. Grace watched them from the bed, exhausted but content. "Thank you," Peter said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me back everything I thought I'd lost, for trusting me with your daughters, for giving me a son, for loving me." Peter's voice was thick with emotion. "You saved me, Grace. I didn't even realize I needed saving until you showed up in Tombstone with those two little girls and brought light back into my life." "You saved me too," Grace said. "We saved each other." The twins were introduced to their baby brother the next morning and were instantly smitten, though Emma was a bit jealous when Paul cried and took Grace's attention. Peter scooped Emma up and told her she would always be his first daughter, his special girl, and she seemed mollified. The ranch settled into a new rhythm with the baby. Grace was amazed at how naturally Peter took to fatherhood, changing diapers and walking the floor with Paul in the middle of the night so Grace could rest. He was still cautious, still protective, but he had learned to balance his fear with trust. In September, just after Paul turned 2 months old, a well-dressed stranger arrived at the ranch in a hired carriage. Samuel came to the house to announce they had a visitor, and Grace felt her stomach drop when she looked out the window and saw her father stepping down from the carriage. "Peter," she called, and he came immediately, Paul in his arms. "Who is it, my father?" Peter's jaw tightened. "Do you want to see him?" Grace thought about turning him away, about holding on to her anger and hurt. But then she looked at Peter holding their son, at the twins playing on the floor, at the life they had built together. Holding on to bitterness would only poison the good things they had. "Yes," she said. "I'll see him." Her father looked older than she remembered, his hair completely white now, his face lined with grief. He removed his hat as he entered the parlor, his eyes going immediately to Grace. "Daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "Father," Grace replied, keeping her tone neutral. His eyes moved to the twins, to the baby in Peter's arms, to Peter himself. "I got your letter. After the funeral, I couldn't stop thinking about what you wrote, about forgiveness, about family." He looked back at Grace. "Your mother's death made me realize how much time I've wasted on pride and foolish notions of propriety. You're my only child, Grace. These are my grandchildren. I've missed so much already." "You have," Grace agreed. "You missed my husband Thomas dying. You missed the twins' first steps and first words. You miss me being desperate and alone." "I know," her father said, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I know, and I can never make that right. But I'm here now, begging you to let me try. I don't expect you to forget what I did. I just hope you might find it in your heart to forgive me and let me know my grandchildren." Grace looked at Peter, who gave her a small nod. This was her decision. "Father, this is my husband, Peter Patterson, and our son, Paul. You know about Emma and Lily. Peter adopted them legally. They're his daughters now." Grace took a deep breath. "You can stay for a few days if you'd like. Get to know your grandchildren. But I need you to understand that my life is here now. I'm not the same person I was when I left Philadelphia." "I can see that," her father said, looking around at the comfortable home, the obvious love between Grace and Peter, the healthy, happy children. "You've done well for yourself, better than I ever did for you." He approached slowly, looking at the twins. "Would you girls like to meet your grandfather?" Emma hid behind Grace's skirts, but Lily, ever the bolder one, walked up and stared at him. "You are old," she announced. Everyone laughed, breaking the tension. Grace's father smiled through his tears. "I am old, little one. What's your name?" "Lily. That is Emma. She is shy. We have a baby brother." "So I see," Grace's father said. "He's beautiful." Over the next 3 days, Grace watched her father try to make amends. He played with the twins, read them stories, and listened with genuine interest to Peter's descriptions of ranch life. He held baby Paul and told Grace stories about when she was small, stories she had forgotten or never known. On the morning of his departure, Grace's father pulled her aside. "I'm going back to Philadelphia, but I'm not going to stay there. I'm selling the house and my business. Too many ghosts. I thought I might go to California, try something new while I still have a few good years left." "That sounds like a good plan," Grace said. "I was hoping I might stop back here on my way. Maybe stay a bit longer next time if you'll have me." Grace felt the last of her resentment crack and fall away. "You're always welcome here, Father, your family." He embraced her, and Grace let herself be held, feeling the healing of old wounds. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "Your mother would be too, if she had lived long enough to get over her stubborn pride. You're stronger than both of us ever were." After he left, Peter found Grace on the porch, watching the dust from the carriage settle back onto the road. He put his arm around her shoulders. "You did a good thing." "I hope so," Grace said. "Emma and Lily deserve to know their grandfather, and so does Paul." "Speaking of Paul," Peter said, "he's asleep, the twins are napping, and Mrs. Chen says we have an hour of peace. Want to take a walk?" They strolled to the east pasture, to the cottonwood tree where Rebecca and her son were buried. Grace had been there before, had left flowers on the grave, but this was the first time Peter had brought her there himself. "I wanted to tell her about you," Peter said, looking at the simple headstone. "About how you gave me a reason to live again, about Emma and Lily and Paul. I think she'd be happy for us. She always wanted me to be happy." "I'm sure she did," Grace said gently. "She loved you." "She did," Peter agreed. "And I loved her. But Grace, what I feel for you, it's not less because I loved her first. It's just different. You're my second chance, and I thank God for you every single day." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Peter Patterson." "I love you too, Grace Patterson." They stood there for a while in the warm September sunshine, honoring the past while embracing the present. then walked hand in hand back to the house where their children waited. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, and illnesses that swept through despite their best efforts. Emma broke her arm falling from a tree when she was 7, and Lily nearly gave them all heart attacks when she wandered off chasing a butterfly and was lost for 3 hours before Samuel found her asleep under a mesquite bush. Paul grew into a curious, adventurous boy who kept them constantly on their toes. When Paul was 3, Grace gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Patricia. 2 years after that came another son, Philip. The house that had once echoed with loneliness was now filled with the constant noise and chaos of 5 children, and neither Grace nor Peter would have had it any other way. Emma and Lily grew into lovely young women, smart and capable. Emma developed a talent for training horses, and Lily showed an aptitude for numbers that made her invaluable in managing the ranch's accounts. Paul became a skilled cattleman, learning everything he could from his father. Patricia was the artist of the family, always drawing or painting. Philip was still young, but he showed signs of having his father's quiet strength and his mother's kind heart. Grace's father visited twice a year, eventually settling in a small house in Tucson where the dry air helped his breathing. He became a doting grandfather, and Grace was grateful that her children knew him as a loving presence rather than the cold, proud man who had once rejected her. Mrs. Chen and Samuel remained with them, growing older but no less vital to the functioning of the ranch. Samuel taught all the children to ride, and Mrs. Chen made sure they knew how to cook and care for themselves. They became like grandparents to the Patterson children, loved and respected by all. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Peter surprised Grace with a new house addition, a sunroom on the east side with large windows that caught the morning light. "I know you miss your sewing," he said. "I thought you could use this space for a sewing room, maybe teach the girls your skills." Grace cried and kissed him, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. The sewing room became her sanctuary, a place where she created beautiful things and passed on her grandmother's techniques to Emma, Lily, and Patricia. Peter expanded the ranch over the years, buying adjacent land when it became available. The Patterson Ranch became known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and fair dealing. Peter never forgot the kindness of giving someone a chance, and over the years, he hired several men who were down on their luck, including a former gambler trying to go straight and a young Mexican man fleeing violence across the border. All of them found not just employment but family at the Patterson Ranch. One evening when they were both in their early 40s, Grace and Peter sat on the porch watching the sunset, as had become their custom. The twins were 19 now, beautiful and independent. Emma was courting a young rancher from a neighboring property, and Lily had her eye on a banker's son in Tombstone. Paul at 15 was already as tall as his father and twice as confident. Patricia at 10 was a whirlwind of energy and creativity. Philip at 8 was their gentle soul, always the peacemaker among his siblings. "You ever think about that day you arrived in Tombstone?" Peter asked, reaching for Grace's hand. "All the time," Grace admitted. "I was so frightened, so alone, I thought my life was over." "It was just beginning," Peter said. "Best day of my life when I found you sitting on that bench with those 2 little girls." "You didn't find me," Grace corrected, smiling. "God put me in your path, or fate, or whatever force in the universe makes sure lonely people find each other." "Whatever it was, I'm grateful," Peter said. He pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss that still held all the passion and promise of their early days together, deepened now by years of partnership and love. "Papa, Mama, come quick." Philip's voice rang out from the barn, urgent but not frightened. They hurried over to find all the children gathered around one of the horses, a mare who had been pregnant for months. She was lying in the straw, and as they watched, she gave birth to a perfect little foal. "It's a miracle," Patricia breathed. "It's nature," Paul said practically, but he was grinning. "It's both," Grace said, wrapping her arms around her youngest children as Peter helped the mare and foal. "Miracles happen in nature all the time." The foal struggled to its feet on wobbly legs, and Emma laughed with delight. "Can I train her, Papa?" "We'll see," Peter said. "She's got to grow a bit first." They all stood there in the barn, the whole family together, watching new life take its first steps. Grace looked around at her children, at her husband, at the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination and love. "What are you thinking?" Peter asked her later, after the children had gone to bed and they were alone again on the porch. "I'm thinking about that scared woman with 2 babies and $20 to her name," Grace said. "I'm thinking about how you looked at us and said you had room for all 3, how you opened your home and your heart when you had every reason to stay closed off." "I'm thinking about how brave you were to say yes," Peter countered. "To trust a stranger with your daughter's future, to build something with me when neither of us was sure it would work." "It worked," Grace said simply. "Against all odds, it worked." "More than worked," Peter said. "We built something beautiful, something that will last beyond us in our children and their children." Grace leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and hay and the soap he used. "I love you, Peter Patterson, today and every day for the rest of my life." "I love you too, Grace Patterson," he replied. "You and those twins who came with you are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one in the vast Arizona sky. 2 people who had found each other when they both needed saving, who had built a life together filled with love and family and purpose. The lonely cowboy and the desperate widow, who had become so much more than the sum of their losses. Inside the house, their children slept safely. In the barn, the new foal rested beside its mother. On the land around them, cattle grazed peacefully. The ranch that Peter's father had started as a dream had become a legacy, not just of land and livestock, but of love and family and second chances. 20 years after Grace first stepped off that stagecoach in Tombstone, she stood in almost the same spot, but this time she was there for Emma's wedding. Her eldest daughter was marrying that young rancher, a good man who reminded Grace a lot of Peter. The church was decorated with flowers from Grace's garden, and all 5 of Grace's children were in attendance, along with her father, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack. Peter stood beside Grace, distinguished in his suit, his hair now shot through with silver. He squeezed her hand as Emma walked down the aisle, radiant in the wedding dress Grace had sewn for her. "Our baby is getting married," he whispered. "She's not a baby anymore," Grace whispered back. "None of them are. They'll always be our babies," Peter insisted. After the ceremony, there was a reception at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and food enough to feed half of Tombstone. Grace watched Lily dancing with the banker's son, who she would marry herself the following spring. She saw Paul showing Philip how to properly skip stones at the pond. She saw Patricia drawing pictures of the celebration, capturing the moment for posterity. Her father approached, leaning heavily on his cane. "You've built something wonderful here, daughter. A real family. A real home." "We have," Grace agreed. "Peter and I together." "He's a good man," her father said. "I'm glad you found each other." "So am I, Father, so am I." As the sun set on Emma's wedding day, Peter pulled Grace onto the makeshift dance floor. They swayed together to the music, surrounded by their children and friends and community. Two people who had found love when they least expected it and had nurtured it into something enduring. "You remember what you said to me that day I proposed?" Peter asked as they danced. "I said yes," Grace replied, smiling. "Before that, you said that I deserved more than a marriage of convenience." "I remember." "You were right," Peter said. "I deserved exactly what I got, a marriage filled with love and partnership and joy. A wife who challenges me and supports me and makes every day better just by being in it. Children who fill my heart to bursting. A life worth living." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "You gave me all of that too. You saved us, Peter. You took in a widow and her twins and gave us everything." "You gave me everything," Peter corrected. "You gave me a reason to live again. You filled my empty house with laughter and love. You gave me children and purpose and happiness I never thought I'd have again." They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by the life they had built together, the family they had created, the love they had nurtured from the smallest seeds of hope. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joys and triumphs. Emma had 3 children. Lily had 4. Paul married a schoolteacher from Tucson and had twin boys, to everyone's amusement. Patricia became a renowned artist, her paintings of the Arizona landscape sought after across the territory. Philip became a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend university, making everyone proud. Grace's father passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Grace holding his hand. He was buried in Tombstone, and the whole family attended the funeral, honoring the man who had made mistakes but had worked hard to make amends. Mrs. Chen and Samuel both lived to ripe old ages, passing within months of each other. They were buried on the ranch, under a pair of pine trees they had planted together years before. Their children came from California for the funeral, and Grace made sure they knew how much their parents had meant to the Patterson family. When Peter and Grace were in their 60s, they decided to turn over the daily operations of the ranch to Paul, who had proven himself more than capable. They kept a hand in things, offering advice and wisdom when asked, but they also finally took time to simply enjoy life together. They traveled a bit, visiting Emma and her family in Phoenix and Lily in Tucson. They attended Patricia's art exhibitions in San Francisco. They visited Philip in Denver, where he had his veterinary practice. But they always came home to the ranch, to the house that held a lifetime of memories. On a warm evening in May 1918, Grace and Peter celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. All their children and grandchildren had come for the occasion, filling the house once again with noise and laughter. There were 15 grandchildren now, ranging from infants to young adults, and the chaos was wonderful. After dinner, after the cake had been cut and the presents opened, Peter took Grace's hand and led her out to the porch, to the spot where they had spent thousands of evenings together. "Tired?" he asked, settling into his chair. "Happily tired," Grace replied, taking her own seat. "That's a lot of grandchildren." "It is," Peter agreed, "and every single one of them is a blessing." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the sounds of their family inside the house. Grace thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that desperate day in Tombstone to this moment of perfect contentment. "Peter," she said. "Yes, my love. Thank you for having room for all 3 of us." Peter smiled, the same smile that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Grace, I didn't just have room. I had been waiting my whole life for you 3 to fill it. I just didn't know it until you arrived." "We were waiting for you too," Grace said. "We just didn't know where to find you." "Well, we found each other," Peter said, "and we made a life together, a good life, the best life." "The best life," Grace echoed. They sat together as the stars emerged, holding hands as they had for 36 years. Two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and had built something beautiful and lasting. The mail-order bride who had arrived with twins, and the lonely cowboy who had said he had room for all three, had created a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Inside the house, their children tucked their own children into beds, telling them stories about their brave grandmother who had traveled across the country with two babies, and their kind grandfather who had opened his home and heart to a family in need. The children listened with wide eyes, understanding that they were the product of that courage and kindness, that love story that had begun with an act of faith on a dusty street in Tombstone. And on the porch, Peter and Grace Patterson sat together under the vast Arizona sky, grateful for every moment they had been given, every challenge they had overcome, every joy they had shared. Their story had started with loss and loneliness, but it had bloomed into something neither of them could have imagined that day, when a desperate widow and a grieving widower had taken a chance on each other. It was a story of second chances and opened hearts. A family built not just on blood but on choice and commitment and love. Of a house that had room for three becoming a home for generations. And as the night deepened around them, Peter and Grace knew that whatever time they had left, they would spend it together, surrounded by the family and the love they had created, living proof that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them, when you open your heart and say yes to possibility. Their hands remained clasped as they sat in the peaceful darkness. Two people who had saved each other, who had built a life together that exceeded their wildest dreams. The lonely cowboy and the mail-order bride with twins had found not just companionship but true love, not just survival but a life filled with joy and purpose and family. And that, they both knew, was the greatest blessing of all.